Agreed. We'll talk to you about properties and stuff.
I know that. Yeah, these properties is lately turning.
This is it.
All right, anything more on this topic? All right, item number 3, discussion regarding infrastructure improvements along the east-west Indian Hills Road, portion of the Oklahoma Turnpike Authority's access program. Good evening, Council. A couple of months back, the City Council considered a resolution that would have authorized the Turnpike Authority to complete construction drawings through Norman, including frontage roads, wetlands development, and multimodal pathways along both sides of the Access Oklahoma plan through Norman. Council rejected that idea, which put in motion some actions by the Turnpike Authority, and they basically captured the file drawings up to that date and saved the file and set it aside and began to advance drawings through Norman, both east-west and north-south, that excluded frontage roads, multimodal pathways, and wetlands, linear wetlands development along the river. At some point after that realization, property owners along the Indian Hills corridor reached out to their elected representatives and some committees working on the City Council's AIM Comprehensive Land Use Plan update reached the conclusion that the impacts on Norman's future do vary greatly between a north-south alignment and an east-west alignment. The Comprehensive Land Use Plan committees have maintained lines on the comp plan for land use purposes that show in no detail the alignment of the infrastructure that the Turnpike Authority will build, and that allows their process to move forward with how does that infrastructure impact land uses between now and the year 2040. In those conversations, there was recognition that frontage roads along the Indian Hills alignment provide the comp plan an opportunity to designate real property on both sides of that alignment for high-density residential development. And a big struggle our Comprehensive Land Use Plan Committee is working on right now is trying to figure out where to put 24,000 rooftops in Norman, with the goal of trying to keep that density in between the 48s. And that is becoming more and more challenging. So council members received phone calls from constituents and said that group of constituents was very much interested in advancing frontage roads along the Indian Hills alignment, and it wanted to talk about Indian Hills only. So that is the conversation topic before you this evening, is whether or not the council is interested in advancing a resolution that says in the event frontage roads, access points, multimodal pathways, and linear wetlands are developed, that upon completion, the City of Norman would accept those infrastructure projects and take over the maintenance of them. we asked our Public Works Department to take a look at maintenance costs with or without the frontage roads, which would include the reconstruction of the existing Indian Hills Road. It would be replaced with a new Indian Hills Road. It would be 2 lanes eastbound and then 2 additional lanes built on the north side of this stretch of the turnpike going westbound. And what the Public Works staff recognized is we've got a capital project identified to rebuild Indian Hills, and it's got a price tag of about $18 million, which would be avoided in the event council requested the turnpike rebuild Indian Hills at their expense. And we wind up with some budget savings along that Indian Hills corridor should council decide to consider such a request. There was some interesting changes with or without frontage roads over I-35. With frontage roads, there was an indication that a bridge structure would take the frontage roads over the railroad tracks, and they would include the development of grade-separated railroad crossings at BNSF on the Indian Hills line. And without the frontage roads, the structure over I-35 would terminate west of those railroad tracks, and it would remain an at-grade crossing. So that's some interesting topography when you think about coming off of a structure in a relatively short distance to a stop sign at an at-grade crossing of BNSF. So that was just one of the differences we recognized with or without frontage roads along Indian Hills. And staff's here to answer any questions you may have, and if we don't have the answer, we'll be happy to track that down before any further consideration council may have on the subject.
Is there any consideration of not connecting the east side and west side of the highway frontage roads? Or is that illogical not to put them together?
I will ask one of those 2 traffic engineers back there, because I'm an accountant, so I couldn't hear.
So if the frontage roads were to be constructed on the north and south side, they would connect across I-35. That was one of the items that was included. And our understanding is, without seeing anything more than what's on the excess Oklahoma with the revised alignment without the frontage roads, we still believe that they will take Indian Hills across, so it will connect east-west across the interstate.
Yes, sir.
Are these maintenance costs, are they annual? I see 20-year cost of maintenance. Are these annual costs, or are they?
This is cumulative for 15 to 20 year service life. Just picking a time frame that seems logical. And we went through and actually on the without frontage roads, we looked at it mile by mile and looked at the pavement rankings that we have and kind of made what we thought would be a logical expenditure over that time frame and included that. And then we looked at, if those are all new frontage roads, what do we think may be a reasonable cost over that same time frame, which would basically be a crack sealing program.
Okay. So that's over 20 years, not annually?
Yes,
Not
sir.
$3 million annually?
Yes, sir. That's cumulative.
Okay. All right. Are there any other kind of tertiary costs that are included with this? Signalization on intersections near the turnpike, widening of roads near the turnpike, and the other costs outside of this scope that will be the city of Norman's responsibility?
And certainly a lot of that's going to depend on what our traffic flows show, because we're not going to put in traffic signals or stop controls unless it's warranted, and we have systems in place to do that through the MUTCD. So that's how we make those determinations at a later time. And also, as far as widening of roads, the only roadway at this time that we're anticipating widening is 36. The other roadways we think will keep functioning as they are today. But certainly if we saw a huge increase in traffic at that time, we start looking at what accommodations need to be made to be able to handle that at a future date. But so, that is not included in these costs.
Mr. Sturts, and just when you said that, we have a project, I think it's a bond project for a 48th Avenue widening, 48th Northwest. I think it goes to 3 lanes in like 2029. I think that 3-lane effort, does it stop at Tecumseh?
Well, this phase that we're working on right now would go, the first phase is from Robinson to Rock Creek. Phase 2, which is also in the 2019 bond, would be the next mile to Tecumseh. But we do ultimately, we've always anticipated that would go all the way up to Indian Hills with future timeframes.
So that ideology doesn't change with or without frontage roads?
Correct.
Okay.
And then I see green infrastructure to protect water quality up there. I mean, do we have any kind of a cost associated with what we think that might be? I mean, I know it's a very large scope to wrap your arms around. So
the number we've used generically, and it was the scope of wetlands development at the mouth of the Little River on the north side of Lake Thunderbird, and it came from a professor that Mr. Mattingly works with at the University of Oklahoma, who spends a lot of time in the study of wetlands and the design of wetlands. And the number he came up with was about $30 million in conversation with Norman Next, who actually put together an application and sought ARPA funding from the state to develop those wetlands in a smaller but bigger around area there at the Little River. So this stretch would consider kind of an elongated linear wetlands concept that would serve as an amenity maybe for that high density residential development along both sides of that turnpike. Cost estimate wise, it's probably as good a guess to talk about that $30 million round number that the OTA would develop, or they'll build a bridge and fly over it.
And do we know any, again, crystal ball question, do we have any kind of idea what maintenance on wetlands would be? I mean, do that be dredged often? Is there shoreline maintenance?
Rule of thumb, $800 an acre.
$800
So it'll be dependent on what size it gets built.
Is that annually?
Per year.
Per year. And how many acres are we potentially talking about here? A couple hundred maybe? I mean,
I saw Richard. I don't know if Richard has a guesstimate of how many acres generically in the linear wetlands.
So, best guess is probably somewhere between 40 to 80 acre parcel. So it's very hard to guess at. I'm trying to draw through it right now to get a better answer.
no, that's good. I just was trying to get a ballpark idea of what maintenance obligations might look like on something like that. Okay, I'm sure I'll have more, but that's all I got right now. Thank you.
Have they built linear wetlands with any other cities before, or is this new?
I'm not aware of a project with that kind of label on it. That the conversations of a linear wetland were actually a derivative of the housing subcommittee to your Ames comprehensive land use plan update, and they kind of recognized the ability to take advantage of the existence of the Little River, dress it up, clean it up, because that's where we have runoff from the city of Moore and South Oklahoma City, and the ability to capture and clean that water prior to it making its way to Lake Thunderbird, and having an amenity of a water feature that could be a real attraction to residents in high-density residential.
I would say concerned that there aren't ones previously constructed, and would wonder if there could be like a citizen advisory committee that helps determine if this happens, what is being built. I'm kind of curious, does the OTA know how much it would cost to construct along this route? I know Richard said he's working out that, but he's not an OTA employee.
The Turnpike folks indicated that the engineers they have under contract and on the payroll, they design bridges and freeways. They asked if we had resources to participate in the design of such wetlands that actually achieve the purpose. And I did indicate that we do have resources at the University of Oklahoma with some expertise. We also have community members that have managed stormwater projects in developments that they've undertaken in that same watershed. So the the Turnpike's response was, well, we'd love to have your people do that design work and plug it in with ours. They would prefer not to design that in-house at the OTA.
Then, there's other environmental concerns with protecting wildlife from getting flattened. Some of that is fencing at grade with crossings underneath. Those best practices I heard are that the tunnels constructed are materials that animals would want to travel through. Do frontage roads, could you do it with or without frontage roads, this particular environmental mitigation? And again, if it's not something in the wheelhouse, could the Citizen Advisory Committee of experts like Wildcare, for example, have input on that process?
I know there are parts of infrastructure that have wildlife tunnels underneath some of the elevated structures. I would say yes, it's absolutely achievable. I think there are turnpike stretches that have such infrastructure already included.
Examples?
So the ability to, get expertise as to how frequently such an undercrossing makes sense to protect the wildlife. I think that's absolutely something you could choose to add to the list.
Have they done it in another municipality or area?
There are stretches I've driven on the way to Tulsa that I recognized those types of crossings. So I do believe they have included that infrastructure in other segments.
And yeah, I'm just kind of curious, well, if a resolution doesn't pass and we care about this and it's coming, then how do we mitigate if that is not covered? What would the cost of that be, that fencing and that earthwork?
The closest example we have of a scenario where such consideration happened after the fact, we did receive a communication from the mayor of Hera, Oklahoma, and they had not considered the installation of a sewer line and a water line under the turnpike alignment through Hera. And after the turnpike was complete, they went back to say, hey, we need to stick a couple of pipes under there. And they were allowed to do so, but it was at the expense of the city government. So.
And they have done the wildlife on both H.E. Bailey and the Creek Turnpike, so they have done it on other projects and have experience with it.
Was that something they did out of best practices or something that was in a resolution and guaranteed?
I don't have that information with me. We could certainly try to get that information.
I do know that the professor that Darrell was referencing that's doing these wetlands where is he? Is that in Osage County or somewhere like that working? He's got other, it's not like his first project. And so I think the linear arrangement of those other than a large box basically is what I understood. Because what he's doing is he's putting plants in there to filter the dirt particularly and any kind of trash that comes down there. And so these would be, as I understood our conversation, a series of ponds that would flow to each other, each one pretty shallow, but having some kind of aquatic plants in it.
And I did ask wildlife experts about linear wetlands, and this project will irrevocably alter the landscape for the wildlife, and so what goes back potentially may provide habitat that was lost. I'm not saying all of it, but I think the way it was described to me was think of a web of an ecosystem, and when you're cutting through it, you're messing up, predator, prey, all the habitats for reproduction. So
the ability to coordinate fencing in strategic areas to direct wildlife crossings to designated places as opposed to a deer trying to cross 70 mile an hour, 80 mile an hour turnpike, I'm sure is in everybody's best interest.
Oh, well, I was thinking the wetlands, it's a turtle thing, but it's more than just that, the turtles. It's like frogs and other things that I imagine potentially would live there. I'm unclear. So it would be nice to have a little more conversation on that.
We will make that so.
Stephen had some questions. I think this has been answered, but you tell me if it's not. How will it address not only existing runoff pollution from Norman, Moore, and Oklahoma City, but also the pollution caused by the construction existence of the turnpike, construction/existence of the turnpike itself?
There is monitoring that already takes place along the Little River, and we have existing monitoring stations that would be identified as upstream and downstream of their project, and would be able to identify changes in the constituents in that Little River water flow. So I know Mr. Mattingly has a crew, and Mr. Sturts has a crew of all of our stormwater professionals that do all that monitoring and reporting to DEQ, et cetera.
And then he asks, why are frontage roads necessary for the higher density housing, changing subject, along the north side of Norman, given the densest areas of Norman are currently not near a highway?
I'm going to ask if I can impose on the Housing Subcommittee Chair of your AIM Steering Committee, who actually has spent an awful lot of time studying that subject about the ability to put high density along both sides of Indian Hills in a way that does not currently exist in Norman. Mr. McCown, if you would be so kind.
Certainly, Mayor, I didn't completely hear your question. I apologize.
I'll read it again if you'd like. Why are frontage roads necessary for higher density housing along the north side of Norman, given that the densest areas of Norman are currently not near a highway?
Fair point. It's a fair question. I've been working on this a really long time, going back to the 2004 Comprehensive Land Use Plan that we're currently working under, the Norman 2025 plan. And the pattern that we were looking at, and I don't know how many of you will remember, the alignment was shown up here, a half a mile north of Indian Hills Road, and it didn't make sense up there. You only got the negative. All you got was the negative. This neighborhood in the city of Moore would get the negative. Anything that was built here would only get the negative. When we looked at other things the OTA had done around the Quail Springs Mall area, where which really stretches from Portland all the way over to Kelly, but the main development is kind of from western May, Pennsylvania. I've got those out of order, but that zone through there has attracted all kinds of development. And the main thing that you see with high density development, the development of apartment communities, is people want to be where there are retail shops and restaurants. The retail industry has really moved over into the restaurant sector. So it's places to go and things to do, and places to eat. In fact, all of this stuff is tied together, and you'll see trends in new multifamily apartments. Kitchens are getting smaller. People aren't cooking. They don't have ingredients inside their apartment to cook. Those are real things that are happening. So it's the totality of all of these things together, where you've got the frontage roads, which allow for the commercial activity, which then makes the multifamily project also viable. The commercial thing doesn't happen unless the multifamily thing happens, but they don't happen independent of one another. In the particular instance, right here, we have zoned a major multifamily component for this piece. Over 700 units are approved, and major multifamily retail and commercial is envisioned here at this 130-acre parcel. Without all this, you can't get to it. You literally would have to drive past all 2 miles all the way over here to Western Avenue, and then come back on a county road, the current Indian Hills Road. That's not at all a viable commercial option. Retailers like that was Costco's #1 site, and it's that relationship between those dynamic realtors or dynamic retailers and the multifamily world that is what makes that an attractive element. When I-35 was developed through Norman, you do have quite a bit of multifamily housing on I-35. I wasn't involved in any of it, but there's quite a bit on both sides of the highway, particularly the west side. A lot of auto dealers came in early and sort of elbowed out a whole lot of other multifamily development that could have or maybe should have happened along that corridor. But if you study how these things are developing all over the nation, those new apartment communities are going to be attracted to those locations because they're the convenience of all of these things that come together. I hope that answers the question.
And it does, and the thought of why this is different than the north-south alignment, it's really, really basic. The city of Norman has the ability to provide sewer and water services along the Indian Hills corridor. There isn't a time in the foreseeable future that we would be able to provide sewer or water to a north-south alignment to support development of any kind. And that's why, it really is kind of a tale of two different infrastructure scenarios. It only works along Indian Hills because you have the ability to sewer it and water it, and you do not have the ability to sewer and water a north-south alignment.
And the reason we're looking at multifamily is, instead of single family, is because we can put more people in there. Solving the 1,100 houses that projected to need over the next years to be able to keep up so we can get cheaper housing, so we can do some of the things to affect the market.
I think the number of housing units anticipated in the plan is 24,000.
It's 23.
23,000 rooftops, and council's initial goal was keep that development between the 48s. And if you can't get the density going north, there is no place for the 23,000 rooftops to go.
How many rooftops? I know we approved things. Do we have a total amount that is projected to come here? And is there room for even more?
There is a
is it all
lot
built
of
out?
room. Council has approved some plats that do include multifamily along this alignment already.
Is that like 1,000?
Mr. McCowan identified 700 that we approved. I don't know if we're aware of more multifamily already approved.
There's 300 approved on the north side.
There's your 1,000
here as well.
So we're about 1,000.
In what's already
approved.
So, but there's substantially more room for more.
I would say.
That assumes a 1.5% growth rate, which is what we seem to have been having for the last few years. 1.5 to 2, if those people need a place to live.
I was going to ask one of Stephen's questions, but I also remembered I saw Councilmember Montoya's hand up as well.
Oh, so just going back to the $300 million of the wetland construction, whose cost shoulders is that on? Is that us, or is that part of the project?
The Turnpike Authority indicated their willingness to construct the linear wetlands project along the Little River as part of that project. And if council chose not to accept those public improvements, what we've heard is they would create a longer bridge over I-35 to clear more of the Little River and not develop those wetlands.
But the cost would be, so let me phrase it, if council accepts this, then the cost will be on them to construct.
Yes, sure.
Otherwise, if we don't accept the frontage roads and infrastructure improvements, then it'll be on us
Correct.
to develop the wetlands.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Okay, I thought Councilmember Holman's questions, this was a good one. It was OTA project and frontage roads. How much projected revenue is OTA expected to lose by eliminating frontage roads and interchanges unless COM asks for them? And the other follow-up question you had was, don't they need access points and economic development along the east-west to make it a viable project for their bondholders?
We were told that you would have the ability to get on and off at I-35 and on and off around 60th Avenue West. If there are more access points or less access points, they weren't going to change their revenue projections based on the addition or subtraction of 4 or 5 access points.
So they don't project to lose any revenue?
Correct.
Do you have more news on mine? He must have done something while I was holding my finger on it and didn't have. I wanted to make sure he got all his questions. Questions for legal in that. Someone or several people need to be prepared to answer legal questions on the record that confirm or refute the legal claims being made for and against the OTA. I'm not sure the parameters on that.
All right, I can tell you or give you some answers to the legal questions that I'm aware of, that I've seen. One of them involves 69 OS Section 1716B, which concerns the lease of real property to the authority by subdivision agencies. And the second argument I've seen is under 69 OS Section 3004, which talked about connecting or feeder roads or streets. All right. When evaluating the argument under 69 OS Section 1716B, it's helpful to start with this Oklahoma Supreme Court case in 1977 called State Ex Rel. Remy versus Agar. And this case was the taxpayer brought a QTAM action seeking recovery and the quieting of title in the name of the city of lands upon which the city dump was located. Our dump used to be located down by the Little River, actually behind the current water reclamation facility back there. That's where Norman used to dump its trash. You guys can imagine the river moves on occasion, so the river moved, and there were some questions about the boundary. It appears as though the city had gained a little bit of real estate because the river moved a little bit to the south, and there was an effort by the city at that time to sort of resolve those issues, and one of the things that ended up happening is the city transferred about 160 acres to the private property owner on the other side of the river. In this case, this plaintiff said, I don't think that that land transfer was legal, so I'm going to file litigation to try to recover that property that the council gave up at that time. What's helpful from this case is this statement by the court that talks about the issue of public property and a municipality's ability to alienate that public property. And the court said a municipal property held in a governmental capacity that is for public use cannot be sold without special legislative authority unless the public use has been abandoned or the property has become unsuited for continued use. Essentially what that means is if the city has property that's been dedicated to the public for public use, the municipality cannot sell that property unless there's special legislative authority or the public use has been abandoned or the property has become unsuited for continued use. For example, the park across the street, Andrews Park, still used as a park, dedicated to the public. Council could not sell that property to another public entity or to any other entity unless there's some legislative authority that says we can do that, or again, the property's been abandoned or has become unsuited for continued use. Now, I understand this Remy case is from 1977, but it was actually cited in this 2021 case by the Oklahoma Supreme Court, and that involved the sale of 8.8 acres of parkland. Again, Tulsa tried to sell part of the park, and that issue got challenged, and in this case, the court cited this Remy case for that rule. You can't sell land that has been dedicated to the public for public use. So if you look at the language of 690716B, what that says, and I've sort of trimmed this down to take out the language that really isn't applicable, what it says is all municipalities are hereby authorized and empowered to lease, lend, and grant or conveyed to the authority, and we're talking about the Oklahoma Turnpike Authority, at its request upon such terms and conditions the proper authorities of such municipalities may be reasonable and fair, and without the necessity for advertisement, order of the court, or action or formality other than the regular and formal action of the authorities concerned, any real property which may be necessary and convenient to the effectuation of the authorized purpose of the authority, including public roads and other real property already devoted to public use. If you remember, in Remy, the court said you can't sell property that's been devoted to public use without special legislative authority. 1716B is the special legislative authority that would allow the municipality to lend, lease, or grant, or convey to the Turnpike Authority any property already dedicated to public use that may be necessary with regard to constructing a turnpike. That's all this does. It doesn't say that the city has the authority, or that the OTA has to grant or has to obtain the city's consent before building a turnpike. What it says is it gives the city the authority to lend, lease, or grant to the Turnpike Authority any property that's already been dedicated to public use that is necessary for a turnpike. So, in other words, this statute is a special legislative authority we talked to about in Remy that allows a municipality to alienate property that's been dedicated to the public if it's necessary for a turnpike construction. It does not, it only concerns, again, it only concerns public roads and other real property already devoted to public use by its terms. It doesn't apply to private property. It doesn't prohibit the Turnpike Authority from using its power of eminent domain to acquire private property for the purpose of constructing a turnpike. And it doesn't require that the OTA get consent for anything other than any public road or real property that they may need for the purpose of constructing a turnpike. Moving along to 69 OS Section 3004. Sections 3001 through 3020 of Title 69 of the Oklahoma statutes grant any county or a combination of cities, counties, or towns, or resolution of the governing boards discretion to jointly create a public trust for the purpose of planning, financing, constructing, and maintaining, or operating a toll expressway upon locations now hereinafter authorized by Section 1705 of Title 69. Essentially, what this statute does is gives municipalities the same authority to construct tollways that the OTA has. But to do that, you have to create a public trust, and it has to be done under this provision in, again, Section 3001 through 3020. Section 3004, which is specifically the one that I saw somebody refer to, authorizes a public trust created under Section 3001 to improve or construct connecting or feeder streets or roads to the toll expressway, even though such connecting streets or roads would be free roads. So in other words, to create a public trust for the purpose of constructing a toll expressway. And on some of the roads that are approaching that toll expressway, the public trust and the contractor say, you know what, those roads aren't in very good condition, and we want to use some of this revenue that we're generating as a result of this expressway to improve these connecting and feeder streets or roads to the toll expressway, because those roadways are free. You don't have to pay anything to travel on the roadways up to the toll road, but you can use some of the revenue that you obtain as a result of the toll road construction to connect some of those connector roads. That's all this does. Again, it doesn't provide that the OTA has to get the city's approval before connecting a turnpike. It simply says, number one, it applies to public trust. And if you compare the definitions, I mean, what I've seen, I think the confusion is there are different definitions of toll expressway and different definitions of projects or turnpike projects. Toll expressways, again, can be constructed by public trust created by municipalities, whereas projects or turnpike projects, those are what the OTA is authorized to construct. The definition for toll expressway is in 69 OS Section 3011. Again, for the purpose of this act, the term toll expressway is defined to mean any urban, toll urban, or rural expressway or expressways, which may consist of separate sections or segments separated by intervening highway or street connection, which may be laid out wholly or partially within the corporate limits of any incorporated city, and the cost of the construction of which has or is to be paid for by revenue bonds issued by the public trust. So tollway expressways are paid for by revenue bonds issued by the public trust created under section 2001. And if we look at the definition of project or turnpike project, which is in the enabling statutes with regard to the turnpike authority, project or turnpike means any express highway, superhighway, or motorway, wayports, aviation transfer centers, or aviation hubs constructed under the provisions of this article, it's Article 17, by the authority. So there's a difference between what a toll expressway is and what a project or a turnpike project are. One is paid for by the public trust, one is paid for by the OTA under the provisions in those enabling statutes. So the conclusion is neither one of these statutes require the OTA to obtain a municipality's consent before constructing a turnpike project. The OTA has eminent domain powers granted to them by the state. And again, 1716B essentially allows, that's the statutory provision that would allow the city to transfer property that has been dedicated for public use to the OTA if that was appropriate. And then again, section 2004 applies to public trust with regard to the creation or construction of toll expressways as defined in 6901 section 3011. So those are the legal questions that my understanding are out there. If anybody is aware of any other legal questions, I'd be more than happy to look into that.
One of the other questions that Stephen asked was in paragraph 5 or section 5. He asked that we put down to Douglas to 48th Avenue Northeast. Why 48th Avenue Northeast? Why not 36th Avenue Northeast? 25th.
I received a phone call from the property owner up on Sooner Road at Indian Hills, owns both sides, and said, I've got development proposals for medical clinic, and they are requesting that access via frontage road to make that development work. So that's simply at the request of property owners that far out.
It just seemed arbitrary. I didn't know why. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so does the OTA need a resolution to build the east-west connector as it is reflected on the website right now, without the frontage roads, without the additional access points? That's it for now.
That's it for now. Okay. Further thoughts or comments? My tongue's good. Yes, sir.
Well, the suggestion that frontage roads be required for high-density housing is kind of insane. We don't need one-way roads to be able to build apartments. We have apartments on lots of things in our frontage roads. There is no need for these frontage roads for high-density housing. Just, it's straightforward. Am I to understand that we would be the first with linear wetlands?
We are unaware of an existing linear wetlands development in any other project component of the turnpike.
Are you aware of other places that put in linear wetlands that are now struggling with the public health hazard of making a mosquito sanctuary?
I am not.
And that they're now working to remove those linear wetlands?
I would have to defer to our OU professionals.
Now, what would be the cost of widening 60th Northwest, 12th Northwest, Northeast, 48th, 128th, and 156th?
I'll look over at Public Works and say, generically speaking, some of those may be projects on the
66
books.
is already widened. There'd be no expectation to widen it further. 36 is already bond packages that's already included. 24th, I mean, generally you can assume it's approximately $8 to $10 million a mile to widen. We have a project already widening it's 24th Northeast, we're talking about 24th Northwest. We don't have that on the schedule. I don't know that this would cause us to put that on the schedule. The next one would be 12th Avenue Northeast, which is already 4-lane. There's no expectation that it would need to be widened. And then 120th and 156 are both outside of city limits where the interchanges are located.
Are they outside city limits, or are they right on,
They are,
like jogging?
what I saw, they're actually outside, both of those interchanges are outside city limits.
But the roads do extend back down into.
They do.
So those are not direct costs of the construction of these access points. So yes, this is accurate. This could be accurate what you guys have put together, but it doesn't include all of the costs that are associated with it. Because if you're insisting that we need these frontage roads for high density housing, then these access points are going to have a lot of traffic, and that's going to need all these roads to be widened.
If high-density residential, Rick, if you go back to that slide with the map, if high-density residential does take place, the idea is that you want those high-traffic generators to be located on major transportation corridors, as opposed to trying to put a 700-unit apartment complex on local residential streets, because they would be plugged up at from 7 a.m. to 8:30 and from 4:30 until 6 p.m. So that concept of put your high-density traffic generating multifamily residential along those corridors and take full advantage of the width and the traffic volumes that infrastructure is designed to handle.
Is Indian Hills the local residential road?
Right now, it's a 2-lane built to residential standards, is my guess.
It's basically a county road, and from the interstate to 48th Northwest, we already had that in the 2019 bond package. It should be widened to 4 lanes.
Speaking of bonds, on the with capital expenses that we're looking at on without frontage roads, how much of that can be covered with grants?
We apply for about every grant under the sun, road construction related.
And we won't get any of them until we get them. We can't predict when we're going to get them.
That is absolutely the guarantee.
But so how much of these do we think? Now, I know like with 36th Avenue, we've been trying on that for a few years. But the rest of them, well, all of them,
they're still, we can still apply for grants for them, so it's not necessarily going to cost this entire amount. In fact, we'll probably not jump into these projects until we've got some of those costs
covered by grants.
Oh, absolutely. They would wind up on a capital project list where they would linger until a funding solution presents itself.
And since we've got this benefit of the foresight that Indian Hills is going to need some TLC in a few years, we're probably going to start applying for those grants here shortly.
Yeah, the funding cycles, there's time parameters about how much work you have to do and have in the books before you start applying for grants, whether it's right-of-way acquired or utility relocation or your design already in the books before you're able to go compete for those grant dollars.
So I've heard reference to Harrah's pipe situation a few times as the nightmare scenario that if we don't sign a resolution to partner with the OTA, that if we forget to put a pipe underneath their turnpike, they're not going to bury that pipe for us.
That's what Harrah shared with us.
Was there an expectation from Harrah that the OTA would come in and pay to bury their pipe when they're sitting there refusing to repair their roads that were damaged?
The expectation was that had the sewer line and water line been requested prior to the construction of the turnpike, it would have been installed as part of the project cost.
So that sounds like Harrah's mistake.
I think they would agree with that statement.
So, with housing on Indian Hills, we're looking at optimistically to solve some of our, to at least take a bite out of our housing needs. How much of that do you anticipate is going to be resided in by, well, I guess they wouldn't be residents of Moore anymore if they moved into the apartments that we construct on the south side of Indian Hills?
There's a section of the city of Norman that jumps up, and I'm trying to remember how many feet, or a quarter mile north of Indian
to the house
Hills.
section.
So that's inside Norman's city limits on the north side of Indian Hills.
Basically from 60th up to 40, from 48 to 36, excuse me.
How many housing units does Moore need for the next 20 years?
Not a clue.
Okay, so not trying to draw any kind of animosity against Moore or anything like that, but just population centers. If we put housing there, it's not going to serve just the exclusive municipality that we've been focused on this entire time. It's going to be to the benefit of the residents of North also. So we won't get that, to say that, say, 3,000 housing units are going to take away 3,000 housing units that Norman needs is probably a little inaccurate.
I would say, yeah, any housing unit built in the South Metro, once it's built and for sale or for rent, it's first come, first serve. And depending on the affordability we're able to achieve in Norman, that will dictate who winds up lining up for those housing units. I mean, we hear from Norman residents looking for affordability make their way to Moore and find more affordable housing options. So yeah, there is no way to say if you build 3,000 multifamily units there, only Norman residents are allowed to rent. But that's the same for Moore and Oklahoma City as well. Wherever those units are going, people are going to fill them up. We know that.
And it'd be nice to put our high density housing right where people have to pay $5 a day to drive to work, right? And there's no contracts in discussion right now. So this resolution isn't going to commit them to doing anything, correct?
That is correct. Step one, a resolution would allow them to finish construction drawings to 100%. And before construction began, and I'm trying to remember the name of that particular contract, would come back for execution. This does not result in the city of Norman accepting those improvements. This is just saying we have a willingness to do that. Before construction began, actual contracts that were binding would be executed by both parties.
So all these dreams could just stay dreams.
Always.
Yeah, for a lot of this, I kind of feel like a broken record. I could go through and show you negative impacts on other communities as indicators of our potential future. How there have been instances where staff hasn't been completely honest, transparent, or forthcoming or unbiased with us. How they're advocates, they're lobbying counsel in the background with vested interest in these access points where they're going. How much this could cost our city. Everyone knows the sentiment of the community. And I'm thinking that some of you have had the notion implanted that the excuse to dismiss the will of the people, that we are elected merely to make the hard decisions. If people are just too stupid to understand, you got to make those decisions that, despite opposition from the community, that's why we're here, and it's our God-given right and voter-approved responsibility. But deep down, you know that's crap. Yet here we are.
We're here.
Please, Rob. You're disrupting the meeting.
No, I think he deserved it. I think he deserved that applause. I think he deserved that applause. I'll sit here quietly.
Well, I appreciate it. I have a feeling it's not going to have much of an impact on the outcome. You know, for whatever the resolute reasons are that go unspoken, you know, that authority to make the hard decisions seems to be all that the council needs. And there shouldn't be any surprise that the people don't trust this council, because a lot of the times I don't think I trust this council. I really don't have a whole lot else to add that I haven't already said at some point. But we don't need to be resurrecting this. If we think that we need to have all these mitigation methods, these impact studies, if we have a true concern with the city, its impact, then we need a contract first. Nobody seems to have thought about that this resolution isn't going to commit them to anything. It's just going to give them what they're desperately asking for, and then we're hoping that they'll give us what we want in a contract. That's all I got.
Definitely not trying to color the conversation in any way. This is really just for clarity. Hypothetically, say we pass a resolution, we get to the contract phase, and the things that we put in the resolution aren't honored in the contract. Do we have the ability to revoke the resolution, or is it too late then?
Well, there's a couple things I think may help. And I did have a chance to go back and look at the video from the March 29, 2022 study session, where OTA did come down and bring their folks to answer questions. And of particular significance on that video, it's, if you look at it, it's at 2 hours, 14 minutes, 25 seconds, where the engineer who's responsible for the environmental part of this talked in depth about the environmental process that they're going through, talked about the fact that they were willing to share that information with us once they get it. So I think some of the issues may be, obviously as this process goes along, there's going to be additional information that you're going to have that's going to give you a little bit better of an idea as to how you want to proceed. The way that we talked about this before was resolution, obviously asking them to do certain things or requesting certain things, and that would be followed up by a contract. So the contract would have to be approved by council, and if council doesn't agree with what it says in the contract, you don't have to approve it. I mean, it's that simple. If there were a set of circumstances where there were elements in the contract that at some point in time you felt like were delivered, then the remedy is to file a breach of contract action, because that's what that would be. I mean, if you sign it and they sign it, and there's something that happens that results in some deficiency, the option would be to file a breach of contract action in district court. I mean, obviously you could try to negotiate to see if you can come to some agreement to resolve that. But again, I think this process will generate some additional information that you have before you to give you an idea as to what the plans are. It's just we haven't gotten there yet. I know there was a little bit of issue before about why it's taken so long. And I think the answer to that question is about a month or so after OTA was here was when the first round of litigation was filed. And my understanding, I know that one of those cases was claiming that there was an open meeting violation, that all of the contracts they had let with regard to this were not valid. So my understanding is that OTA told its contractor stop working. When I'm going through this process and looking, the last case that got resolved was November 30th, 2022. It was one of the last particular district court action with regard to this particular project got determined. And then going back and watching that video again, listening to what their engineer was saying, she said that they thought that they would start the environmental process in about a month and it would take about a year to complete. So if they stopped their project or they stopped all of their efforts a month or so later, and they didn't start it back up until November of 2023, you would expect that somehow they probably would be finished sometime in November of 2024. Again, can't twist their arm, can't make them do that, but if you could sort of think about and look from a timing perspective, how all this stuff comes together, it kind of does make sense as to why they wouldn't be finished yet. But you would have that information, and again, if we believed that there was something that was promised that wasn't delivered, then again, that would be the appropriate way.
What would be the consequence or penalty for a breach contract? Is that something we'd have to put in the contract to spell that
Well,
out?
I mean, generally the measured damages for breach of contract, that way the difference between what you were supposed to get out of the contract and what you got. So, for example, if there was a provision in there that talked about linear wetlands at a cost of whatever the cost was, and that wasn't delivered, you would be seeking a cost to develop those wetlands, whatever that number is. I mean, obviously, it's going to be based on whatever evidence you can put forward to show what those costs are. But it's the difference between what you anticipated getting versus what you got.
Thank you, no, it's helpful, appreciate that.
I was curious, okay, so the resolution, not legally binding statement of what we would like to see potentially in a contract moving forward. I would ask around the efforts will be made to mitigate stormwater effects of the construction of the east-west connection to the stormwater quantity and quality by the use of green infrastructure practices as applicable to protect bodies of water. Is that an appropriate place to put, I'm calling it citizen advisory committee, but expert advisory committee? Like, I would like to make sure that since wetlands haven't been done before, that there is this understanding that if this happens, that they're tied to using experts.
So the thought of finishing that statement to say through the use of or through the participation with Norman Community Group and local experts in the development and implementation of wetlands.
Yes, and wildlife, that would go in there too. I just want to make sure all that environmental.
And maybe the appropriate place to put that may be in the contract, because I think whatever their study looks like, I think for protecting our interests, you probably would want to have an expert that we hire to look at that, to give us recommendations on this is what you should put in there. I mean, obviously, I don't think we have anybody on staff that could have that expertise. And again, I think the appropriate place to put that would, at that level of specificity.
It's too granular.
Right, would be in the contract, because again, I can only go on what I saw on the video from what the question being asked and the answers that were given was, yes, it was specifically stated that we are doing a NEPA-style study. So that's what their expert said. And then when the question was asked, will we have access to that, the answer was yes, you will. So it may be one of those deals where you get that study, you give it to your expert to say, based on this information, what is it you think we should require in terms of mitigation? Because that's my understanding is NEPA studies are for the purpose of identifying those potential environmental problems and then making recommendations on what's necessary to potentially mitigate any negative effects. So we would be looking at that for the purpose of saying, in a contract, this is what we think you should do, or this is what we're requiring that you do from a contractual perspective to mitigate this risk that was identified in your study.
And if I heard correctly, maybe you would see contracts in November or later?
I don't know when you would see it. I mean, again, I think the statement that I was making about that had to do a lot with the delay and what's taken so long.
And the magic of 60% design drawings is one of the magic pieces is to say, now we know what to be studied from an environmental perspective. We understand the alignment, we understand the breadth, the width of the infrastructure. We want to go study that. So that's why it hadn't happened prior to getting to the 60% design benchmark.
Okay, Rick. So, Whenever we rejected the resolution back on August 27th, did that stop the east-west connector from being built, being constructed? Is there anything we can do as a governing body to prevent the OTA from constructing the east-west connector?
There isn't anything I can think of, and there isn't anything I've seen. Again, the OTA is a state agency, and the legislature has granted that state agency the power of eminent domain. And as a general rule, eminent domain is taking a private property for the purpose of some public use. There isn't anything we can do to stop that.
So similarly, we couldn't pass a resolution or an ordinance demanding that the Oklahoma Lottery Commission allocate X number of dollars to our public schools.
Correct.
Okay.
Other thoughts or comments?
There was a question asked about rooftops in the east-west alignment. Through Norman, I believe the roof count is 52. And the entire east-west alignment all the way over the Canadian River to Newcastle was a total of 59 rooftops in that alignment.
Their experts said that they're doing a NEPA-style study, and that's their standard practice.
You would have to go and really look at, her comments were fairly lengthy, explaining all of the different federal statutes that they believe that they have to comply with. I know she said they were doing it for this project. I don't think there were any questions asked about other projects. You really would have to listen to her because she talked pretty in depth about the environmental studies that they're doing, and I picked up on what she said. She said that NEPA may apply. So my understanding from is that they're doing everything except maybe the socioeconomic part of that, but that was her statement, and that's the only thing I can go on is what their engineering expert is telling us that they intend to do with regard to the environmental study for this particular project. And it appeared to be pretty in-depth.
On which part of the east-west connector?
As far as I know, all of it. They talked about things like Indian burial grounds and those types of issues that may be, and there could be something along those lines anywhere in that east-west connector. It's not limited to issues with regard to the waterways. And there are a number of different federal statutory rules that she talked about. But I would recommend going back and watching it so you can get a better understanding of exactly what she said. And then, of course, the next thing you're going to be asking is that what they actually did? To give you an idea with regard to whether they're doing what they said they were doing.
Any implication that they're doing any kind of significant environmental impact study? Asked to see the environmental impact study of the Kickapoo. Spoiler alert, it doesn't exist. This isn't their standard practice. The NEPA study they're referring to is probably for the 404 permit they needed to go over the Canadian River.
We are adjourned. Thank you all.